The lighthouse door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of dust, salt, and old wood. The walls were covered with faded photographs of former lighthouse keepers. Daniel moved slowly from room to room, documenting everything with his camera. On the wall near the staircase, he discovered something unusual. Hundreds of names had been carved into the stone. Some were accompanied by dates. Others had only one word beside them: waiting. Daniel photographed the wall. Then he heard footsteps above him. He froze. The sound came from the spiral staircase. Step, step, step. Someone was walking slowly downward. Daniel called out, "Hello." The footsteps stopped. Silence filled the lighthouse. He waited. Nothing. Finally, Daniel climbed the stairs. At the top, he found the lantern room. The huge glass windows surrounded him, giving him a perfect view of the dark ocean. But something else caught his attention. The floor. Moonlight entered through the windows and created shadows. Across the wooden boards, Daniel stepped forward. His own shadow appeared beneath him. Then another shadow appeared beside it. It belonged to a man. Daniel turned around. Nobody was there. He looked back at the floor. The second shadow had disappeared. Daniel's heart began racing. He quickly photographed the floor. When he checked the picture, he noticed something terrifying. The photograph showed two shadows: his own, and the shadow of a lighthouse keeper standing beside him. The next morning, Daniel took the photograph to Elias. The old fisherman stared at it for a long time. Then his face became pale. "You saw him." "Who?" "The last keeper." Daniel leaned closer. "What happened to him?" Elias sighed. His name was Thomas Vale. He disappeared in 1924. Disappeared? During a storm. Elias explained that Thomas had been the lighthouse keeper during one of the worst storms the coastline had ever experienced. A fishing boat had sent a distress signal, and Thomas climbed to the lantern room to guide the sailors toward safety. The storm became violent. The lighthouse shook. The waves struck the cliff like explosions. And then the light went out. When the storm finally ended, Thomas was gone. His body was never found. But that wasn't the strangest part. The next night, the lighthouse light turned on by itself. And according to witnesses, Thomas's shadow could sometimes be seen inside the lantern room. Daniel became obsessed. He returned to the lighthouse that evening. This time, he stayed until midnight. At exactly 11:59, nothing happened. At midnight, the lantern suddenly came alive. A pale beam swept across the ocean. Daniel looked at the floor. His shadow stretched across the boards. Then another appeared. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room was filled with shadows. Men, women, children, old lighthouse keepers, fishermen, people Daniel had never seen before. Each shadow moved independently. Some appeared to be walking. Some were standing beside windows. Some seemed to be pointing toward the sea. Daniel couldn't move. Then one shadow approached him. It belonged to a young woman. She stopped directly in front of him. Daniel heard a whisper, "Find the room beneath the stairs." The shadow vanished. The lantern went dark. Daniel immediately ran downstairs. He searched beneath the staircase and discovered an old wooden panel hidden behind layers of dust. He pulled it open. A narrow passage descended into darkness. At the bottom was a small underground room. Inside were dozens of objects: a pocket watch, old letters, photographs, a child's toy boat, a rusted compass, and hundreds of handwritten pages. Daniel began reading. The pages had been written by former lighthouse keepers. Each keeper had recorded strange events inside the lighthouse, but the final pages belonged to Thomas Vale. Daniel read them carefully. Thomas wrote that the lighthouse wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by memories. According to Thomas, every person who had died near the lighthouse left behind an emotional imprint. The lantern didn't simply illuminate the sea. It illuminated the past, and the shadows appeared whenever someone needed their stories to be remembered. Daniel continued reading. Then he reached the final entry. Thomas had discovered that the fishing boat during the storm hadn't been the only vessel in danger. Another ship had been hidden behind the storm. A smuggling vessel. Its crew had caused the accident that endangered the fishermen. Thomas had discovered their secret. He planned to expose them. But before he could tell anyone, he disappeared. Daniel looked at the final page. At the bottom was a sentence that made his hands tremble. Some stories are buried because someone wants them forgotten. Suddenly, he heard a sound behind him. Footsteps. Daniel turned. A shadow stood at the entrance. Thomas. For several seconds, the shadow remained motionless. Then it pointed toward the wall. Daniel followed its gesture. Behind an old wooden shelf was another hidden compartment. Inside was a metal box. Daniel opened it. There was an old photograph. It showed several men standing beside the lighthouse. One of them was a respected businessman from the village. Daniel recognized the family name. The same family still owned much of the coastline. Inside the box was also Thomas's missing journal. Daniel realized the truth. Thomas hadn't disappeared because of the storm. Someone had silenced him because he knew too much. The lighthouse had been preserving his story for more than 100 years. Daniel returned to the village and showed Elias the evidence. The old fisherman stared at the photograph. "My grandfather knew," he whispered. "Why didn't he tell anyone?" Fear. That single word explained everything. Daniel decided to publish his findings. But before leaving the lighthouse for the final time, he climbed to the lantern room. The light turned on again. This time, the shadows appeared quietly. Dozens of them. Daniel stood among them. He understood now. They weren't there to frighten him. They were waiting to be remembered. He looked toward Thomas's shadow. "Your story won't be forgotten." The shadow slowly raised its hand. Then every shadow in the room turned toward the sea. For one brief moment, Daniel saw something through the glass. A ship. An old wooden ship moving across the horizon. Its lanterns glowing faintly in the darkness. Then it disappeared. The lighthouse went completely dark. Daniel left the building before sunrise. Months later, his investigation became famous. Historians uncovered evidence supporting Thomas's journal, and the lighthouse was eventually declared a protected historical site. But the strangest part remained unexplained. Visitors continued reporting unusual shadows inside the lighthouse. Some saw Thomas. Others saw fishermen. Some saw people they had never known. And every person who claimed to witness the shadows described the same thing. The shadows never attacked. They never chased anyone. They simply appeared, as if waiting for someone to listen. Years later, Daniel returned to Blackwater Beacon. The lighthouse had been restored, but the old lantern room remained untouched. He climbed the stairs alone. At midnight, the light turned on. Daniel looked at the floor. His shadow appeared. Then another appeared beside it. Thomas. Daniel smiled. But this time, there was something different. Thomas's shadow slowly pointed toward the wall. Daniel looked. A new shadow had appeared. It belonged to someone Daniel had never seen before. A little girl. She stood beside the window. Daniel whispered, "Who are you?" The girl raised her hand and pointed toward the sea. Then she disappeared. Daniel looked out through the glass. Far across the water, a tiny light blinked 3 times. Once, twice, 3 times. Daniel understood. The lighthouse wasn't finished telling its stories. And perhaps it never would be. Because some buildings don't simply hold history. They remember it. Some walls don't simply stand in silence. They listen. And some shadows aren't there to frighten us. They are there because someone, somewhere, still needs their story to be heard. So the next time you see an old lighthouse standing alone against the sea, don't assume its darkness means it is empty. Look carefully. Because when the light turns across the ocean, you might discover a shadow beside your own. And if that happens, don't run. Listen. Because every shadow has a story. And sometimes, the lighthouse is waiting for you to hear it. If you enjoyed this mysterious journey into Blackwater Beacon, make sure to subscribe to Whispering Walls. More forgotten buildings, hidden histories, and unexplained mysteries are waiting to be uncovered.